The subcommittee will now come to order. We'd like to welcome our panel, and I'd like to begin with an opening statement. In my time serving in Congress, I have learned as oftentimes is the case that the initial problem isn't as big a deal to people as a poor explanation of a problem can be. Further cover-ups are the best hope of people who know they are in the wrong and the worst move for those who get found out. People try to hide problems or minimize their existence usually face a swifter and more ferocious corrective response from Congress and the public than they had if they had simply come clean. It is with great surprise and disappointment that I read the internal memorandum about the operation of the division implementing the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Act, CFATS, and its program at the Department of Homeland Security. I, for one, have historically been a strong supporter of this program. I believe the statute is sound and the regulations reasonable. In fact, the Anderson memo calls for only one legislative change, long-term extension of the program. The CFATS program was not meant to be another EPA-style program designed to find people or a bureaucratic backdoor to overregulate chemicals. CFATS was meant to be a collaborative effort to secure high-risk facilities with facility-appropriate measures based upon risks presented. Congressional intent was that cooperation would get facilities into compliance. We did not intend to increase federal revenues through enforcement actions. I hope DHS is not looking to abandon our original intent. Last March, I acknowledged CFATS was a work in progress, but I felt security was being enhanced and significant public and private investments were being made to implement the program. I still believe security at facilities with chemicals is much better today than before Congress gave DHS its first ever regulatory authority. Unfortunately, my confidence in DHS and the substantial amount Congress has given to it is not nearly as strong. Someone compared CFATS to an unmanned police car positioned at the side of a highway. It wards off speeders, but not much else. We need to be assured that DHS's CFATS program has a plan and intends to focus solely on correcting its internal problems, implementing the CFATS program as drafted in law, and not suggesting the CFATS program should take on any other additional responsibilities. I mean, they better first do the responsibilities designed under law than to take on additional ones, such as drinking water or IST issues. CFATS is an appropriate component of the subcommittee's jurisdiction, and the days of matador oversight of this program are over. I urge all members of this committee to join me in that effort. As a fellow U.S. military officer, I have tremendous respect for Undersecretary Beer's service to this country. That said, he and I have been taught that there are only 3 acceptable responses when questioned by an officer. Yes, sir, no excuse, sir. Or, sir, I don't understand. 4. I expect no less than that today. I want to welcome Undersecretary Beers and Deputy Director Wolf, who along with Director Penny Anderson showed great courage with the frankness of the internal memo. Mr. Wolf, both of you should know that the committee takes very seriously any evidence of undue pressure, influence, intimidation, or retaliation whatsoever because of your testimony today while we continue to investigate these important issues. In other words, we really do appreciate this internal memo. I think it's been very, very helpful, and we want to ensure those who came forward are not penalized for that. Please let my committee staff know right away if you have any concerns. Retaliation, intimidation of congressional witnesses is illegal and will not be tolerated. Mr. Beers, I trust you will ensure that you are in agreement with me that no retaliation should be tolerated, and we will hold you and any other White House officials accountable to that. With that, I now yield to the distinguished ranking member from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes for the purpose of offering his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing today. Undersecretary Beers requested an internal memo on the status of the CFATS program and recommendations for improvement in the summer of 2011. This memo was delivered to Mr. Beers in November of 2011 and leaked to the media and detailed in a story on December 23, 2011. I must say, when I read the internal memo, I was surprised and dismayed by the level of dysfunction and the lack of progress within the CFATS program. I'm also amazed that during this time the subcommittee discussed CFATS program this year during our work on H.R. 908, the full implementation of the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Act. We were simply unaware of the severity of the situation within DHS and the CFATS program. The portion of the internal memo is related to challenges to implementing these priorities. I won't go into all the details, but it seems to me the root of the problem lies at the fact that DHS has hired people who are unqualified for their positions and was prohibited from hiring appropriate and qualified individuals, and they had no training program to help those folks who were unqualified. This inappropriate hires, along with the lack of proper training of the employees, has forced DHS to, instead of reassigning inappropriate employees, rely on contractors to do work that should be done by the agency. The internal memo outlines several priorities of the program, including the process for the review of the site's security plans. Unfortunately, at the time of the memo, DHS had received 4,200 site security plans, and not a single plan was approved. I know that DHS is working to clear up all the Tier 1 facilities, but it's been 6 years since the program was enacted, and we haven't even cleared the low-level facilities. Defining how to conduct compliance inspections and preparing staff to do the inspections to date, DHS has conducted not a single compliance inspection. Not that any of my industries that I represent along the Houston Ship Channel are looking for an inspector to come knocking on the door, but they have been working to comply, and they've made substantial private investment. In some cases, we actually were able to receive grants through DHS for Homeland Security protection and our plant protection. But I must say that this proposal reinforces the problems identified in the internal memo, which mostly revolve around the fact that DHS is constantly making changes and more complicated than they need to be, and not relying on existing systems such as the TWIC card to work. What I'm speaking about is developing the personal surety programs. DHS transmitted a new personal surety program to OMB, and I have some concerns about this proposal, and we'll discuss that later. One, because at earlier hearings of this subcommittee, I felt like I had some assurances that the TWIC card would be used as a standard ID for someone working, whether it be in waterside or land-based industry under CFATS. My concern is additional personal security programs will make the duplication of the CFATS. So that's one thing our committee needs to look at. Last year, the subcommittee hearing, I asked Undersecretary Beers if the department intended to integrate TWIC into the personal surety program, and I received a positive response, and yet the proposal does not make clear that TWIC is an acceptable background check. Quite frankly, now is not the time for DHS to go reinventing the wheel when implementing a personal surety program. The memo also includes the agency's planned response, including a plan of action for 85 items. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today to confirm, but I believe several of the action items have been initiated or completed. To say the least, I'm disheartened by the lack of progress in the CFATS program, which seems to stem directly from lack of appropriately assigned and trained employees and serious lack of morale in the program, which seems to stem from the fact that no one constantly knows that the program will be reauthorized by Congress. Chemical facility security is extremely important to the protection of our public health, and particularly in the district I represent. I represent the Houston Ship Channel, which is the heart of the petrochemical complex that stretches from the Texas Gulf Coast and produces more products essential to modern life, and it's also the largest petrochemical complex in the country. I can't stress how important the success of CFATS is to my constituents who are the employees and live in the communities that surround these facilities. They deserve the best security standards possible to prevent the act of terrorism on U.S. soil. Our role today is to listen to our witnesses and get a better understanding of the problem and see how Congress can assist. The agency recommends several legislative fixes, and I'm hoping we on the committee can work together and find a compromise on how to assist DHS after hearing their suggestions and hearing from our stakeholders. The program's too important to our national security to be this much in distress. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Now, the chair now looks to my colleagues on the right if anyone would like time for an opening statement. Hearing none, the chair will not recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling on me, and more importantly, for holding this hearing to examine the implementation by the Department of Homeland Security of the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism program or standards. The letters been made into a shorthand called CFATS. This program is intended to address the threat of terrorism to the nation's chemical facilities. We'll hear testimony about its successes, but we're also going to hear about the program's many challenges. The CFATS program was established in 2006. Now, almost 6 years later, it's clear that implementation has stumbled because of serious challenges and limitations in the program. Undersecretary Beers will testify about a detailed report that he received in November of last year. This report takes the form of a memorandum, and DHS also provided it to the committee. It paints a stark picture of this program. According to this memorandum, the program has been plagued by personnel issues, budget issues, and statutory limitations. The challenges described in the memo are serious and they must be addressed. Department of Homeland Security has a plan to address the identified problems, and that plan deserves our careful scrutiny. This is a crucially important effort, and we must get it right. In some ways, the odds have always been stacked against this program. This program was created by a provision not authorized by this committee, but a writer on an appropriations bill. The program was not established with carefully crafted legislation that defined its mission and forged a vision for its implementation. It did not have adequate enforcement authorities, enforceable deadlines, or clear procedures for approving or disapproving site security plans. It never even had an authorization. And in some ways, it's fortunate that we've learned of these problems when we have, because this committee can now return to this issue and do the hard work of understanding where the problems are and determining how to fix them. It's stunning to realize that this committee of Congress, which has jurisdiction over this issue, reported legislation that simply rubber-stamped the current program for 7 additional years. We didn't really know how the program was working. We didn't give it any guidance. We didn't do our job. And that legislation needs to be revisited in light of this new information. I look forward to the testimony of Undersecretary Beer and learning more about the Department's efforts to get this program on track. The Department can take constructive actions, but it can only do so much. They cannot address shortcomings in the underlying statute. That task falls to us as the Committee of Jurisdiction and the committee that should have been involved in crafting the original provision. That is a responsibility we must take very seriously. I hope today's hearing will be part of an ongoing effort by this committee to address these serious challenges facing our chemical facility security program. This is an important issue. It deserves our attention. In the last Congress, when I was chairman of the committee, we were working on a bipartisan basis. We brought in all the stakeholders to craft legislation to authorize the program. It was a major undertaking. We brought in industry. We brought in labor. We brought in everybody else that had a concern about this issue. We were consulting everyone throughout the process. That's the kind of type of undertaking we should begin anew, because what we saw this last year was not a furtherance of examination of the program, but simply saying, oh, it's already in effect for 6 years, we'll continue it down the road, and we hope it'll do a good job. We've got more work to do than just sending our best wishes with a long period of authorization without doing a thorough examination to figure out how we can make this program work the way we intended it to and the way it must to protect the security of the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back the time.
And I thank you, Mr. Waxman, for your statement. I'd like to yield with permission of the committee to Mr. Barton for 5 minutes. But before I do, I would just like to say, based upon my opening statement, I think Mr. Waxman's response was pretty much what I said. When problems are hid, you're going to face a swifter and more ferocious corrective response by Congress, and that's really part of that concern.
And I would also say we did have a hearing prior to the markup of that bill where Department of Homeland Security said things were going well, and obviously, and industry. And obviously, that is not the case either. So with that, I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I'll take that time, and if I don't, I'm happy to yield it to anybody else that you wish that it be yielded to. I do appreciate you for holding this hearing, you and Mr. Green, on the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standard Program, which has the acronym CFATS. Back in March of last year, we discussed the concerns and dissatisfaction that the program had not met its goals. This program was set up to serve and protect the companies and the general public against the potential threat of terrorist activity. I was chairman of this committee back in the 109th Congress and one of the authors of the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standard Act that was included as Section 550 of the Department of Homeland Security Appropriation Act for 2007. The intent was very clear. It was for the safety of the nation's businesses and its citizens against the threat of terrorism in these types of facilities. I understand that the program's got many facets and that the orchestration of a thorough implementation plan at an expedited pace could have challenges. What I don't seem to understand is how the Undersecretary could be so unaware for so long of so many of the internal problems. Why have employees been hired in managerial positions who don't have the skill set to fulfill their jobs? Why has it taken 3 years to start addressing the internal managerial, staff training, and implementation problems? The industry has invested billions of dollars to upgrade security to meet the CFATS requirements. This is beyond disappointing. You have totally mismanaged this program, Mr. Undersecretary. We've spent about $90 million a year, and we have no well-developed direction and no plan. It's my understanding that you've received over 4,200 site security plans to date, but not even one has been approved. Now, we have our differences on this committee and this subcommittee, and there were differences between the Democrats and the Republicans when this bill was put into law, but there is nobody, no one, regardless of political affiliation, that says if you receive 4,200 site security plans, you don't even get one approved? Not one? I mean, when I read that a couple of days ago, I just was astounded. Your own National Protection and Programs Directorate have prevented you from hiring personnel with the experience and qualification to review these programs and to conduct the compliance inspections. You've allowed the hiring of inappropriate staff and have not taken control of your own Infrastructure Security Compliance Division to fix this problem, and it's been 3 years. The administration of the CFATS program must be fixed immediately to provide stability to the program and regulatory assurance to the thousands of covered facilities, many of whom are members of the Society of Chemical Manufacturing's and Affiliates Alliance, SACOMA. They've invested heavily in security measures over the past 5 years to attempt to be in compliance. I have to say one good thing. Your office has been open and candid and transparent in providing the internal memoranda for committee staff to review. That is one positive check mark in your column. Having said that, everything else is in the negative and everything else is black. It is time to get this thing done. If you can't do it, resign. If there are things that need to be fixed, tell us and we'll try to do it. I think Mr. Waxman's opening statement was very good, as was Mr. Shimkus's, which I wasn't here to hear, but I did read. With that, Mr. Chairman, I've got a minute left if you want me to yield this.
Let me reclaim that time and look to Chairman Emeritus Dingo, see if he would like to use the remainder of your time.
Most briefly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to welcome our two witnesses in our panels today, Secretary Beers and Mr. Wolf. And I want to commend you for having this hearing. I want to note that it is being conducted in a bipartisan fashion, something which merits high praise around this place. Having said that, I look forward to the results of the hearing today. I would note that I have a number of these facilities in my district, and when they let go, as one did not long back, it causes lots of excitement. and can cause significant numbers of casualties and enormous hardships on the communities in which the facility might exist. So your labors and your leadership, Mr. Chairman, are much appreciated, and I look forward to the hearing going forward in the kind of spirit in which it has begun, and in the hope that we will be able to see to it that we get these programs of widely differing character under different agencies in the point where they are pulling together and working together to accomplish the great purpose of seeing to it that we have safety and security for the country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dingo. And with that, Chair calls for today's witnesses, the Honorable Rand Beers and Undersecretary of National Protection Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security, Mr. David M. Wolf, who is Deputy Director, Infrastructure Security Compliance Division, Office of Infrastructure Protection, National Protection, and Programs Directorate at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. As you know, excuse me, as you know, the testimony that you are about to give is subject to Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. When holding an investigative hearing, this committee has the practice of taking testimony under oath. Do you have any objection to testifying under oath? The Chair then advises you that under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee, you are entitled to be advised by counsel. Do you desire to be advised by counsel during your testimony today? In that case, if you would please rise and raise your right hand, I will swear you in. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You may now be seated, and it's my understanding that the only opening statement will be given by you, Mr. Secretary, and Mr. Wolf's here to answer questions with regard to the internal. They're both going to give it. Okay. Change in direction from last night. So, Mr. Beers, if you would then, you're recognized for 5 minutes to give your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Shimkus and Ranking Member Green and distinguished members of this committee. I'm pleased to be here before you today to discuss the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to regulate the security of high-risk chemical facilities under the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Act. As you all are aware, the Department's current statutory authority to implement CFATS came about, as mentioned earlier, in Section 550 of the fiscal year 2007 Appropriations Act, and it has been amended recently to extend that authorization until October 4th of 2012. I believe strongly in the CFATS program, and I welcome the opportunity to continue to work with this committee, with the Congress, and all levels of government and the private sector to further improve this vital national security program. Since the inception of CFATS, we have issued a basic rule, we've defined chemicals of interest, we've jointly conducted 2 surveys with industry to define the facilities that have a substantial enough quantity of chemicals that cause them to be determined to be at high risk. After receiving the initial submissions from more than 40,000 facilities that might potentially be under the program, we've narrowed that down now to about 4,500 covered facilities. And in the process of doing that, more than 1,600 facilities, which would have fallen under the program, and 700 facilities, 1,600 facilities have totally removed their chemicals of interest, and 700 have reduced them to the point that they are no longer under the program. So I think we can say that these actions represent some of the successes that have happened with respect to this program and the adoption of the regulation. So I think we can say that there has been a reduction in risk throughout the nation and that the nation has correspondingly been made more secure. The Department has done much work over the past few years to establish and implement this unprecedented program. But as the report suggests, and as we acknowledge, CFATS still has a number of challenges to address. In recognition of this, and upon the arrival of Penny Anderson and David Wolf, I asked both of them to provide for my consideration the views on the successes and challenges of the program. Candid, honest assessments and challenges to the program. These kinds of assessments are extraordinarily valuable tools that we need in order to evaluate progress and to determine where improvement is needed. Furthermore, in a nascent and unprecedented program like CFATS, course corrections are to be expected and ongoing decisions will need to be made. In late November of 2011, a detailed report was hand-delivered to me. It is important to note that in addition to the reference challenges, the report also proposed for my consideration a charted path that will address those challenges. Specifically, the report included an action plan with detailed recommendations for addressing the issues identified, and we have shared those recommendations with this committee. Since my receipt of this report, each of the nearly 100 items in the action plan have been assigned to a member of the program's senior leadership team, and I have already seen progress on these issues. For accountability, planning, tracking purposes, the members of the leadership team have been asked to provide milestones and a schedule for completion of each task assigned to them. The program's acting chief of staff will monitor that progress. In addition, program leadership now meets with my principal deputy undersecretary, Suzanne Spalding, at least once a week to provide status updates to this program. Mr. Chairman, let me assure you, there will be no retaliation to the people who wrote this report, who have served me and you and this nation by frankly telling us where we had challenges and what we need to do about it. Nor will I tolerate any retaliation between me and the office director and her deputy. You have my pledge on that, and I expect to be held accountable to that issue. The Department does take its responsibilities for CFATS and the nation's security seriously, and we are going to move forward both quickly and strategically to address the challenges before us. Again, we believe that CFATS is making the nation safer, and we are dedicated to its success. We will make the necessary course corrections to improve the program to protect the nation. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Wolf for 5 minutes. There might be a button. There you go.
Sure is. Thank you. I would also like to thank the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you today. In July of last year, Penny Anderson and I assumed our positions as Director and Deputy Director, respectively, of the Infrastructure Security Compliance Division, or ISCD, the division within NPPD that manages the CFATS program. In response to the Undersecretary's request that we provide a fresh perspective on the program, Penny and I produced an internal assessment of what we see to be the essential priorities, challenges, and action items necessary to the success of the program. Both Penny and I feel strongly that while the challenges we have identified are not insignificant, they also are not insurmountable. I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions you might have on the background and context behind the challenges we cited, but I would also like to echo the Undersecretary's focus on the action items. We've already made tangible progress in addressing some of the challenges in the report. One issue identified in the report is ISCD's ability to complete facilities' site security plan reviews in a consistent, reasonable, and timely fashion. To help overcome past difficulties in meeting this challenge, ISCD is utilizing an interim review process that allows the Department to authorize Tier 1 facility plans in a more effective and timely manner. Using this interim approach over the past few months, ISCD has been able to more than quadruple the number of conditionally authorized plans. Specifically, throughout all of 2010 and through November 28, 2011, we had conditionally authorized 10 site security plans. In the subsequent 2 months, leading up to January 23rd of this year, we conditionally authorized an additional 43 Tier 1 site security plans. ISCD expects to complete our review of all Tier 1 site security plans and to notify the facilities of ISCD's decisions on those plans within the coming months. ISCD also expects to begin issuing authorizations to Tier 2 facilities during fiscal year 12. And while this interim review process is underway, we're also working on an even more efficient long-term approach to site security plan reviews for facilities in Tiers 2, 3, and 4. Now, this is one example of how we have identified programmatic issues, such as the lack of an efficient site security review process, and found workable solutions to ensure near-term improvements and progress, as well as the long-term success of CFATS. And while not every action item will have a near-term or simple solution, what I can tell you is that I'm very proud to represent the hardworking men and women of the CFATS program, and I'm confident in our ability to address these challenges together. I welcome your questions and look forward to working together to further the success of this important national security program.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. And what I would ask, I'm looking at also the staff, is I don't think we have a copy of that, and some members already want to refer to that. So if I can get staff to grab a copy of that and get it copied so that we could distribute it, because we did have the Undersecretary's opening testimony or for the record. So with that, I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin questions. And I'm going to bounce around a little bit, but the first one, we're in a very fiscally constrained environment, Undersecretary, as you understand, and with the challenges that are going to occur to our military, 45 billion to 90 billion a year that could be cut. We at the national level are going to be looking for everywhere we can go to try to adjust dollars so that we can meet the needs of the primary role of some of the federal government's operations. So let me start with just this budget type question. The Anderson-Wolf memo states on page 15 that ISCD lacks a system for tracking the usage of consumable supplies, which creates an environment for fraud, waste, and abuse. Our concern is this is not an IG or GAO saying that. This is a program managers describing their own program. How can a member of Congress choose to fund a program that is so self-described?
Let me begin the answer to that question and turn to my colleague here. The report notes these deficiencies in the program. We had asked for a management review of the program in December of last year. That program review was completed while this particular report was being prepared and was incorporated into the report, and the comments that you see are part of an effort by management at the most senior level, that means me, asking to make sure that in fact this program was working properly. I want to turn to Mr. Wolf now to talk about what we're going to do about these findings.
And I would just add that we did not find any actual indication of fraud, waste, or abuse with regard to the purchase and tracking of supplies. We found that a system was not in place, and it's something we have already moved forward to address.
Let me reclaim my time, and we know there's action items. We're going to move forward, but that's obviously a major concern that that we're going to have to deal with, not just the committee ourselves, but our colleagues in this whole debate. So we will go ahead and follow this. I do appreciate the fact that you in July brought Ms. Anderson and Mr. Wolf on board. I guess a question would be, since you've been on board Undersecretary since June 19, 2009, what took you so long to have an overview of this program?
The initial indications of concern surfaced in the following year. Prior to that, I had definitely had the sense that the program was an evolving program, that changes were being made, but they were being made in due course with appropriate diligence by the program managers. In July of 2010, I discovered a discrepancy in the way that people were being paid within the program and moved at that point to correct it. In the fall of 2010, we posted a announcement to replace the management of the program.
And then, not to be disrespectful, just to move to another question, because the timeline's kind of important for us, because you testified before us March 31st of 2011, and statements were made. Again, that's my comments back to Mr. Waxman was, you know, we were given a pretty good signal that things were going well. Small problems, but nothing major. One of the questions I asked you was about the high-risk tiering process and the reasons for a drop in the number of those facilities tiered. This is at that time, I was not aware of any mistiering problem. Were you?
No, I was not, sir.
And that's, if not, when did you first learn about the tiering problem?
I first learned about the tiering problem in the beginning of June of this last year.
Was it the earliest time, to your knowledge, that DHS personnel discovered that some facilities had been mistiered? Was the month you had given? Was there, in other words, was there other folks within the department that knew that this tiering process was all messed up?
There was an indication in May of 2010 that there might be a problem with respect to tiering. The individuals within the office looked at the problem and felt that they had resolved the problem and informed people up the chain of command. I did not know that there was a problem at that point in time. I was not informed of that, and the program went forward from there. In 2011, with a new acting director of the office, he asked for a review of the program, and he discovered or rediscovered this discrepancy issue and asked for a much deeper dive into that. That deeper dive is what resulted in the problem being identified to the Assistant Secretary and immediately to me. And that's in June of 2011.
And my time's expired. Just so we can move forward, we're going to continue. Obviously, we're going to have to continue to do oversight over this process. And I hope if there's any relevant activities that folks under your office that have not been doing the job, that through the legal process of removal, that some people can be held accountable, because I do think there is probably, if there wasn't waste, fraud, and abuse, there may have been, there may be theft, and that would be helpful to understand that the government can correct bad actors. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Beers, thank you for being here. As I said in my opening statement, it seems like the problems with, for the last 6 years is that the inability to hire qualified individuals and lack of morale. I think some of that comes from having year-to-year reauthorization. And Mr. Wolf said in his statement, I apologize, none of us have a copy of your statement, Mr. Wolf. What has been done since the memo was released, or since the memo mid-December, or since it was released on the 23rd? There's been some action that's been done that we haven't heard about except for this morning. Mr. Beers, do you know Mr. Wolf's statement about some of the things that have been done in the last month or so?
Yes, I do, sir. I want to start this response, but I also want Mr. Wolf to respond as well. We have looked at the training issues that were identified in the report. We have removed the impediment for hiring training officers within the program so that that can go forward, and we have begun to look at the training requirements in order to take the people who were hired who may not have adequate training for that position that they are in. But lastly, the other thing that we need to focus on here is we have to define what it is we in fact expect from our inspectors when they are doing the final site authorization inspections and when they are doing compliance inspections. David?
I would add that you know, we're very excited about the progress we've made in the past couple of months on the reviews of the Tier 1 site security plans. I believe the progress we've made in that regard and the statistics I mentioned are included in the written testimony as well. We have a very aggressive plan to move forward with the review of the site security plans and to conduct outreach and get into the reviews of the lower
Well,
tiers.
I know you gave some hard numbers. I only have 5 minutes. In fact,
sir.
it's down to 3 now almost.
Yeah.
You gave some hard numbers on what's been done the last 30 days. Could you
Yes, sir.
reiterate that?
Absolutely. We started 2 months ago with 10 Tier 1 site security plans that had been authorized. We're now at 53.
Okay, and that's the only hard number that you gave in your testimony. Like I
I-
said,
I
we don't
believe
have
so.
your testimony,
Yep.
and it's hard to go over something
Yep,
outside
absolutely.
of.
Absolutely. Yep. So we've authorized 43, or conditionally authorized 43 additional Tier 1 site security plans.
Okay, and was
And
that?
sir, all those were taken from my testimony. Those facts are all in my written
Okay,
testimony.
but was that based on actually site visits, or was that from what's been provided by the companies?
That's based on what has been provided by the companies in some instances following compliance assistance visits conducted on the sites by our chemical security inspectors.
Okay, let me get to another issue I've talked about. I mentioned about the personal security program, which was submitted on June 14th of last year, the OMB, and listed as a third priority in the DHS memo. I'm aware that we need to screen individuals against the terrorist screening database. As proposed, the personal security program would require facilities submit background information on all existing personnel within 60 or 90 days upon implementation for existing personnel. Any new unescorted individuals will not be classified as personnel will need, if they have a TWIC card, their information submitted to DHS for 48 hours. In the real world, we went through a big rollout of the TWIC card a few years ago, and it was not as smooth as we would like. In fact, I think there are 260,000 TWIC cards issued in our district in the Port of Houston. And so when you are going to overlay it with a personal security requirement, that what did the TWIC card not cover that you think we need now under the personal surety? Because I'm concerned about reinventing the wheel, even though, like I said, it wasn't, the wheel didn't run too well early, but it's running pretty well now.
Sir, let me clear up some perhaps misunderstanding of the way we intend to use the TWIC card. We will accept the TWIC card as a proof of a background check. We would like to know the names of the individuals who come onto the site who have TWIC cards in order to determine that the TWIC card is in fact still valid. But anybody who possesses a TWIC card, that will be the standard, that will be an acceptable standard. And anybody who might have access to getting a TWIC card can do so to use that in lieu of any other background check.
Okay, I want to make sure that's what was submitted because I have some concern about that, because sometimes what we hear and what even passes in law doesn't get to the final stage. Was that submitted that the TWIC card would be the ID when it's submitted to OMB?
David?
The leveraging of TWIC and other existing credentials was part of the information collection request submitted to OMB.
Well, I would feel comfortable with seeing in writing what you said, Secretary Beers, that the TWIC card, because again, we have thousands, literally, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands around the country, that we don't want to also have a breakdown in redoing something. And I know working with the industry and the bargaining units and everything else is something that ought to be important. I know I'm over my time, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of other questions I'd like to submit if we don't have time today.
Without objection, I thank my colleague, and I'd like now to recognize Mr. Murphy from Pennsylvania, the Vice Chairman of the committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Beers, the memo states that CFATS must build in its ability to critically evaluate itself and conduct mid and long-range planning. So to that end, let me ask for your candid responses. Why was this not done until now?
I beg your pardon? 5 minutes, sir?
Why was some of this not done until now in terms of really evaluating itself? Was there anything that stood in the way of delaying this kind of self-evaluation? I can't.
Thank you, sir. No, sir, there wasn't anything that prevented it. As I indicated to earlier, we have had several reviews. This is the most extensive one which we have asked for, but we've had several reviews over the course of the program since I became the Undersecretary.
Let me, just in for clarification, who sets the CFATS goals and objectives for each year? Who's responsible for that?
I'm sorry, sir?
Who sets the CFATS goals and objectives for each year? Who is responsible for doing that?
Sir, the program directors provide those goals. They go up the chain of command to the Assistant Secretary and on to me. Ultimately, I'm responsible for them.
Are those public information in terms of those annual goals and objectives?
I'll have to check, sir. I don't know whether that's public information at this
Okay.
point.
And how do you measure those goals and objectives? Is that something you have in terms of internal documentation of how you review those?
Sir, let me ask David Wolf to answer that.
There are established performance metrics that we prepare and send up the appropriate chain. So the performance is measured with respect to things such as numbers of inspections conducted, percentage of inspections conducted as compared to the totality of the regulated community.
Well, clearly from the evaluations, things that you're talking about, and I add my comments to the chairman in terms of we appreciate getting your candor on these. But in addition to this, we would like to know, are these factors, are these evaluations somehow factored into employee compensation, such as raises or bonuses?
Sir, as a general matter with respect to the entirety of NPPD, performance is factored into the issue of bonuses or promotions. Dave, do you want to add anything specific?
No, I would echo the Undersecretary's sentiments. Meeting our performance goals is and will be a significant measure for us in assessing allocation of bonuses.
Do you know if any of the CFATS employees or superiors received a bonus since 2009?
I'm sorry, sir, could you repeat that?
Sorry, this microphone isn't working.
No.
Do you know if any of the CFATS employees or supervisors or superiors received any bonuses since 2009?
I don't have that information. We could.
Would you let, I mean, it'd be helpful to this committee if you let us know in conjunction with some of the information you've given us. We'd appreciate that. Let me also say the Anderson-Wolf memo that you have states that employees felt uncomfortable delivering bad news to superiors. So to what extent is the failure to inform you caused by this chilled work environment? And who chilled the environment? That was it you, someone else? Who in the chain of command had that effect? Secretary Beers?
Sir, let me start in answering that. I have said as a management principle based on my 40 years in government that I appreciate hearing bad news, and I don't want to hear bad news from anybody else. This particular issue has been used as a teaching moment by me for the entirety of my workforce, because no one should feel that they can't tell me bad news, because bad news is usually something that we can do something about. And if we don't hear it, we can't do anything about it. I can't speak to the culture within the office and the words in the report, but I want you to understand that to all of the people who work for me, I say that time and again. I am perfectly prepared to hear bad news, and I really don't want to hear it from somebody outside the organization.
Well, as a Navy officer, I admire Marine officers saying that. I recall former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, saying that as he climbed up the chain of the command, the food got better and the news got better too. Unfortunately, it is important to have that bad news coming up. So are you confident now that you're getting full, accurate information, full disclosures on CFATS information?
Sir, I have complete confidence in Penny and David making sure that that information comes to me, and they know that I want to hear it, and they know that I want to fix problems that they surface to me to the extent I have the power to fix it. So, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're time. Can I ask Mr. Wolf to give an answer to the same question?
Yes.
Yes, sir. I can confirm that that Director Anderson and I received the message the Undersecretary was just discussing, that he wants the bad news within the first week or two of our arrival on the job, and that's very much the spirit in which this report was written for him. yeah, within the organization, I can't necessarily speak to how the culture evolved, but I can tell you that Penny and I have gone to great lengths to create a culture of transparency, a culture in which our employees are not afraid to raise issues that they view as problems. We have an open door policy. We have all hands meetings on a regular basis, and we have made it clear that we don't tolerate repression of concerns that folks may wish to
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Let me, before I yield to the Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Dingle, let me ask unanimous consent for 5 days for members of the subcommittee to submit opening statements for the record. Without objection, so ordered. Now, I recognize Mr. Dingle for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy. Secretary Beers, why did you commission a top-to-bottom study of this program?
Sir, when it became evident to me that, one, we had a retiering issue that was brought to my attention in June, and that we had had an issue about locality pay, and we had had a slowness in terms of the approval of site security plans, that I needed to make sure that the new management which we had brought in to take over the program and make sure that it was running solidly brought their full attention to giving me as accurate a picture as possible in this program. As I said earlier, we had already commissioned a management study which was completed during the time that the report was prepared, and that was part of the report as well. So the final request of Penny Anderson and David Wolf was the result of an increasing concern on my part that the program was not running well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now, is the Department of Homeland Security working to engage the industry in helping to get this program successfully implemented? Yes or no?
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Secretary, I know there has been some controversy recently regarding some misclassified facilities. Can you assure me and the members of this subcommittee that you have properly addressed this issue and that you have correctly identified high-risk facilities? Please answer yes or no.
Yes.
Now, these questions to Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wolf, as your internal memo points out, there have been a number of challenges in implementing this program. Do you believe that the program is fixable, yes or no?
Yes.
You do believe it is?
Absolutely.
What are the top 2 or 3 things that need to be addressed to bring this about, in your opinion? The top 2 or 3 things.
I would say the SSP, the Site Security Plan review process, which we've already begun to move forward considerably over the last 2 months, and preparing our inspectors and rest of our team to move forward and conduct authorization and compliance inspections.
Now, what progress have you and the department made in addressing these issues?
We have quadrupled the number of Tier 1 site security plans that we have conditionally authorized just over the last 2 months. We have commissioned an inspector tools working group as well to develop the standard operating procedures, other policies, and to determine what tools our inspectors will need as we move forward to the next stages of this program to actually conduct authorization inspections and to get into the regular cycle of compliance inspections moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You will note I return 1 minute and 27 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Bass, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm not as familiar with the substance of this program and its history and so forth. I don't have a lot of facilities in my area. I am, however, very concerned about this memo. We have oversight responsibility, and to some extent, we're as vulnerable, if you will, to criticism for failure to perform adequate oversight and be vigilant about the use or abuse or alleged abuse of taxpayers' funds. And that's why this memo is bipartisan, because we all know that we have a responsibility to make sure that government is run well. I'm also a businessman and have over my life hired and fired people to do things. I don't like to fire people, but it happens. Mr. Beers, if you were in my position looking at this report, would you consider yourself to have done a good job in your role to date?
Sir, as I've said publicly before, I hold myself responsible for these sets of problems, and I'm committed to fixing them.
If you were your own boss, would you keep you on the job?
I can't answer that question, sir.
Okay. I mean, have you considered the possibility this might not be the right role for you? And it might be time for you to step aside. Mr. Barton referred to it in his opening statement.
Sir, I consider that every day I work for the federal government. I swore an oath of office on at least 3 occasions to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I believe in that. And if I believe I can't do the job, then I will walk away from it, as I have done before.
Do you think it's unusual to have an action memo that, for all intents and purposes, you're not really disputing, with 70 different recommendations, a lot of which are noted in progress? You also noted in your testimony or answer to a question a minute ago that you could address these issues, quote, to the extent that I have the power to fix it. Do you have the power to fix all of these problems?
As far as the issues within this particular action plan, yes.
So
but with respect to Mr. Green's comment about TWIC cards, no, I can't make the TWIC card be broader than the current authorization of the TWIC card, which means that you have to be a transportation worker.
All right. Well, Mr. Beers, this is a disturbing memo. We appreciate the fact that it's come to our attention, and I certainly hope that you understand that most of us haven't seen anything like this. Is a very unusually poorly run agency, and if it's not going to, if at any time you believe that you're not the right person to turn this troubled agency around, that maybe there ought to be a different management structure. So, having made that point, I hope that the committee will carefully watch the progress in this action plan, because the American taxpayers are not going to stand for this kind of alleged or perceived incompetence in management for this very important agency to our nation's security. And
would the gentleman yield to me for
Yes,
the
sir.
remaining of your time? Mr. Beers, I want to follow up with this. We really got to get a handle on this card issue, and we would like for you to provide us your legal opinion of why you cannot deal with this TWIC card. We think you can. We, and that's the Energy and Commerce Committee, have been in discussions with Homeland Security for months trying to resolve this. We think it's within your jurisdiction, and if it's not, we'd like to see the legal reasoning why it is not, so that we can change the law. We think it's within your power now, and I think my friend Mr. Green would be very pleased if we can get a handle on this. Work with us. This is an issue, again, that was brought up in the March of last year's hearing, that we thought we were moving in some direction, and there's been multiple consultations with Homeland Security, and we're not any further than we were in March of 2011. So, yes, I'd like to yield to my colleague.
I know we went through this last year, and because Twit card is under Department of Transportation and Coast Guard. I know there's an issue with Homeland Security. I just don't want to reinvent the wheel, because so many times those same workers that work on the dockside are also at an inland plant. And that's why I would hope with interagency agreement, although in 908 earlier this year our committee passed, we gave that authorization there, language, but it hasn't passed and hadn't passed the Senate, so we need to work on it.
And reclaiming that time, I would just say that Coast Guard is under Department of Homeland Security. This should not be difficult to do. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Plone, my colleague from New Jersey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here this morning to discuss issues facing the chemical facility anti-terrorism standards, or CFATS program, and we're talking about this leaked DHS internal memo from 2011 that clearly shows that DHS faces serious implementation problems with the CFATS program, most notably that the department has received 4,200 site security plans but has yet to approve a single one. The CFATS program was enacted as a rider to the 2007 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill in order to give Congress time to enact comprehensive legislation. And we did just that in the 111th Congress by passing H.R. 2868 in the House. That bill provided a comprehensive security program to protect Americans living near these facilities, but unfortunately the Senate did not take it up. I'm not here to claim that H.R. 2868 would have magically fixed all the problems outlined in the DHS memo, but it certainly provided a much stronger framework to protect the more than 100 million Americans that live in the danger zone of a chemical disaster. Last May, this committee had the opportunity once again to exercise its jurisdiction and set forth a full authorization of this program to replace the vague and inadequate CFATS program enacted in 2007. Unfortunately, the committee decided not to address shortfalls with the CFATS program and just moved a simple extension of the current law. Mr. Chairman, in New Jersey, we have the unfortunate combination of both a large number of chemical facilities and a high population density, so the consequences of insufficient security are dire. And I regret that this committee has not taken a more proactive approach to securing these facilities, and I'll continue to push for a more comprehensive security program to ensure the safety of my constituents living in the shadow of these facilities. Now, to questions, the November 2011 DHS report begins to explain why nearly 5 years after these regulations went into effect, not a single site security plan has been approved. And it reveals that this committee was rash, in my opinion, in passing legislation to rubber stamp the program for 7 years without investigating or addressing the program's shortcomings. Many of us have heard from those in the business community that the CFATS program is still strong and that businesses have done everything they're required to do under the program. According to industry representatives, we should be comforted to know that companies have acted prudently and are prepared for compliance inspections should the department ever begin to conduct them. I hope this is true, but our national security is an inherently governmental function. Many members of this committee have worked for years to establish a robust regulatory structure for chemical facility security, and none should be satisfied with the suggestion that approvals and inspections are insignificant or that the role of the department in this program is insignificant. Now, Undersecretary Beers, do you think that the Department of Homeland Security should play a role in ensuring that our chemical facilities are secure?
Sir, I strongly believe that the department has a role and that the office that is tasked with doing that can play that role.
Do you think that the department must play a role? I mean, you think that it's absolutely necessary that they play a role?
I'm sorry, sir?
Do you think that the department must play a role, that it's absolutely crucial that they play a role?
I think that the original intent of the act is absolutely appropriate and that, yes, the department must play a role.
Would you say that site security plan approvals and compliance inspections are necessary and important to assure chemical facility security?
I think that they're absolutely essential to making this program work effectively.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything you said, and I think the failure of the department to complete security plan approvals and compliance inspections is a very serious issue. I'm glad to see that the department is treating it as such, and I welcome the opportunity to work together towards a strong and effective program. But I guess the point I'm really trying to make here is that this committee has a responsibility to put together an appropriate comprehensive authorization bill and not simply rely on this paragraph or whatever it is. I mean, it's like this long in an appropriations bill that really doesn't give you sufficient guidance or mandates or inspection or enforcement capability to do what you have to do. So I'm not, I understand that there's all kinds of problems with the department, but I think a big part of the problem is that you never had a comprehensive authorization bill to tell you what to do and to give you the authority what to do. And that, so we can sit here all day and talk about how bad you are, and there certainly are problems, but I think that it's our responsibility to do something more comprehensive to provide the guidance, Mr. Chairman. That's my only point. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks very much for being here today. And we have such short little time to ask all these questions, but if I could, first, is it my understanding, and am I correct in hearing that we've spent about $480 million has been appropriated for the program since its inception? Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I believe that's the right number. I can give you the exact number if you want.
But that's ballpark. Thank you. And as Chairman Emeritus Dingell does, he's very good at getting his rifling in on his questions, yes or no. But one of the things I'd like to go back to is the question about working with industry. And you said that you'd been working with industry, but as we, reading the report that came through and looking at the site security plan that, again, has been said a little bit earlier, that you've received about 4,200 SSP submissions that none had been approved. Did you ever hear from industry during this time frame that, gee, what's going on? That these things have been submitted, but we're never hearing back from the department?
Yes, we did receive inquiries from industry about when they were going to be approved.
Do you know how many inquiries you've been receiving?
I don't have that information at the tip of my fingers.
Do you know when you might have received the first inquiry?
Excuse me?
Do you know when you might have received the first inquiry from industry as to when they might have these approved?
No, I can't tell you precisely when, but I can get you that information.
Okay, because again, going back to the earlier testimony, that when you're looking at, it was 5.5 years since the enactment of CFATS, and then it's also the statute itself, and 4.5 years since the final rule. I'd really like to find out when the industry that was being regulated was finding out if they were or not being approved, because there's quite a time frame there. Let me go to the other thing that Mr. Wolf had brought up a little bit earlier, saying that there's going to be an open, and I'm sorry again, I don't have it in front of me, but I just kind of wrote it down. That's saying that you're going to have an open door policy and not afraid to raise issues. And the reason I bring this up is I was a county commissioner for 6 years back, and we had about 1,100 employees in the county. We regulated all kinds of things. We had a lot of different departments. It wasn't unusual for an employee that worked in one of those departments that served underneath the Board of Commissioners to bypass their supervisors and call me at home. Or being from a county of 125,000, they'd run into you at the county fair. They'd talk to you at the grocery store, or they'd say, could I talk to you someplace else? Did you all get any contact from anybody at any time saying, gee, I'd like to talk to you about something that we think there's something wrong going on with the program?
Sir, on this particular program, yes, and that's part of the reason that some of the efforts in order to investigate problems took place in the past. With respect to bypassing the chain of command in order to prevent that particular problem, we in management, and I in particular, have meetings with either individuals or groups of people throughout NPPD that are well down in the chain of command in order to elicit their thoughts and suggestions so that we can improve the program overall.
Okay, may I ask this question? Do you know when you might have started first getting an inclination that there was something wrong with people contacting you, bypassing the chain of command to say, there's something really wrong here in personnel or the way the program is being run?
The first instance that we got of that I can report to you on is The first instance that I can report to you that this occurred would be in the summer timeframe of 2010 when it came to our attention because of a report by an individual that there seemed to be a problem with the locality pay. As soon as we found out that that was an issue, we took that on and went through the process to determine what had gone wrong in terms of the appropriate pay to the individuals involved.
So this would be actually, so the first inclination would be a couple of years after the program was put in place. Would that be correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And just real quick, I know my time's running out, Mr. Chairman, but if we could get some of that information back, because again, I really hope that open door policy does exist and that folks aren't afraid to come forward, because this has got to work. Because again, when you look at the number of with 4,200 SSPs that have been submitted, and trying to get these things caught up, it's very, very important, not just for the department itself, but for all those industries out there trying to comply. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. I would like to yield my time to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Brother Green from Texas.
Thank you. I'm going to revisit the personal surety, but Mr. Wolf, and I appreciate the update that you have. I saw your testimony, and I'm going to encourage the chair that maybe 2 or 3 months from now, we invite you back to enjoy our hospitality again and see how far along we are, because this is such an important issue for a lot of areas. I know Mr. Pallone and mine who have substantial chemical facilities that are not waterside based. Let me get back to the personal surety program, because that's something sensitive, because I have plenty of plants on the water, but also plenty of plants that are not. And the same company owns them, and oftentimes they transfer personnel back and forth. And my concern is what was submitted from the OMB to the OMB did not recognize that the TWIC card, from what you said in your testimony, would be used. And I can understand why something regulated by your agency can apply for a TWIC card. But it seemed like in the federal government we could use the same database, the Coast Guard, Department of Transportation, the TWIC card, and use the same database for the background, and the TWIC card would be interchangeable. And my idea, and I can tell you, some of my folks are going to be frustrated if they end up having to pay another few $100s to get a second card, because their company transfers them somewhere. Not all companies are really nice, and they say, no, that's part of your requirement for the job. You have to have your driver's license to drive the company car. So that's my concern. The proposed personal surety program requires facilities to submit background information on all existing personnel in 60 or 90 days upon the implementation, and any new unescorted individuals who are not classified as personnel would need, even if they have a TWIC card, their information submitted to DHS 48 hours in advance. Was that part of the submittal to OMB? Because that doesn't sound like you're giving TWIC card the consideration.
Sir, I believe that is part of the submittal to OMB, and what I'm trying to convey here is that we are looking at all of the opportunities to leverage the various cards and want very much to go in the direction that you want to go.
Okay. Well, and I know there may need to be an interagency memorandum to work together, and I know sometimes our federal agencies don't like to do that, but it's redundant information if we're using the same database. And I just don't understand why DHS, as we proposed in 2 separate legislation earlier, harmonized TWIC with the leverage and operational of the background check. Is there a justification or an incident that I'm not aware of that have existed within the TWIC system that would require DHS to go beyond TWIC?
I'm not aware of any, sir.
Okay. And it seems to me, because I try and stay pretty close to the ground there with a lot of my folks, and I have not heard one in our area. People may not like some of the chemicals we produce, but they're things that they produce them because somebody needs them in our country. And we want to make sure they're safely produced, both for the people who live around it, but the folks on that plant. And every time I talk about the issue with DHS, you assure me that they incorporate TWIC. I just want to make sure it goes forward from that. And I think maybe we'll even contact OMB and express that concern that don't reinvent the wheel, even though we have two separate federal agencies, and hopefully that would come from both agencies, including Department of Transportation, to use the same database that you have. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any other questions. I'd be glad to yield back to my colleague from Georgia, and I appreciate his courtesy.
Gentleman from Georgia yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly thank the two of you for being here today. And Mr. Wolf, I want to thank you and Ms. Anderson for the work that you've done on this. This may come as a shock, but you know it's not always surprising to us to learn that an agency may be dysfunctional. So this is not always a surprise. But we appreciate the candor, and no one should ever be criticized or subject to anything for being very open, which you and Ms. Anderson have done. So I thank you for that. And I believe that gives us some input. But I wanted to ask you a few questions, if I may, Mr. Wolf. You know, as I looked through the report, one of the things that you spent some time on were the issue of unions within the organization. Can you tell me when the workforce in the division was unionized?
I can't give you an exact date on that. It was before Ms. Anderson's and my arrival, but I want to say spring of last year, maybe March.
Okay. Well, let's, can you tell me, does each worker have to cast a vote in order for their votes to be recorded? As far as, do you know how the process works? Non-voters are considered voters to unionize, how that's counted?
I'm not completely certain about that process.
Can you get me that information?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me how many employees there are in the CFATS program, and how many are eligible to be represented by government unions, and how many affirmatively voted to be represented by unions?
I don't have the totals on the voting, and I will say there are approximately, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, a little more than 200 federal employees in the CFATS program. Of those who would be eligible for union membership or to have voted for union membership, that would be our field force, non-supervisory field force, so a little bit under 100 of those.
At the time of unionization, were all programmatic and accountability measures and job descriptions in place that applied to that workforce?
As we noted in our report, we are continuing to refine the requirements for the inspections and
explain when you started out in your report and you said that the presence of the union at this stage of the program will have a significant negative impact. Explain that.
Dan, I appreciate the opportunity to provide a little additional context to that. The report was not intended to be a statement concerning whether unions in the federal workforce are good or bad, but rather just that a recognition of the fact that this is a program that is very much in its emerging stages, and we're very much in the midst of putting into place policies and procedures for the conduct of inspections, for the operation or the review of site security plans, and so forth. So it certainly adds a layer of complexity that wouldn't otherwise exist. That said, though, along with the union, we have very much a shared interest in moving the program forward and a collaborative relationship.
Certainly. We have an overall big picture here of an issue of national security that we've now kind of gotten bogged down, and does it not make it more difficult, though, after the unionizations take place to implement some of these policies? Are you not already seeing that even on the reference that you had to the mileage reporting?
It does add a layer of complexity, but it also, I think, adds voices in the development of policy that will allow us to develop more sustainable processes moving forward.
What was it, 16 weeks that you reported for the mileage requirements to be done?
I believe that was the number.
While I understand the need that everybody's got to work together,
Yeah.
the fact is that this has caused delay, has it not? Why don't I not make you answer that question? I think we know. But I appreciate your time, Mr. Wolf, and for you and Ms. Anderson to be so candid with your situations. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman for recognizing me, and I apologize for the state of my voice, but I'm feeling well. And I'm pleased to be here, and I thank you both for your testimony. The Internal Homeland Security report from November 2011 provides new support for concerns that problems in the statutory language creating the CFATS program have hindered its successful implementation. And of course, we're talking about Homeland Security here. According to the report, CFATS personnel have not yet determined how to systematically review site security plans. Although the department has set up an interim process to try to get these plans reviewed, staff are still working to develop a process to be used over the long term. Apparently, many initial site security plan reviews have to be redone. The November report states that they have been found to be, and this is a quote, inconsistent with the spirit and intent of the program's mandate. Mr. Beers, would you please elaborate on what the report meant when it stated that site security plan reviews had not been conducted consistently with the spirit and intent of the statutory mandate?
Madam, I can't specifically speak to the reason behind that. I can give you some broader context about what happened with respect to the efforts to get site security plans that in fact met the requirement. As the program was rolled out and as it evolved, the guidelines for the information that needed to be provided in the site security plans failed to elicit appropriate responses from industry. Some of that undoubtedly was or could have been done better if the guidelines that we had put out had been more clear, and some of it was simply on the part of industry not providing that information. I don't mean to suggest in any way that that was an intentional act, but it required us to go back to those particular facilities and ask for more information in order to be able to get to a site security plan that in fact appeared to meet what we needed to have in order to have a site security plan. That iterative process ended up taking time when those site security plans were initially filed, and that's part of what I regard as the due diligence that we and industry need to undertake together in order to ensure that a plan that's finally authorized and approved is a plan that's capable of providing the kind of security that you all have charged us to build. But let me turn to Mr. Wolf about the specific comment in the report.
I want to, yes, briefly, if you would, please, so I can go on to another question.
About the site security plan review process specifically?
Well, it's just why I'm very concerned that these delays have occurred.
Yeah. You know, we've taken steps to address those through the implementation of our interim review process, and as you know, the Undersecretary and I have mentioned, you know, we've in the last 2 months quadrupled the number of SSP site security plans we've been able to authorize, and I think the future is bright moving forward on that path.
But I thank you for that. You're trying, but I appreciate that, and I appreciate that the department is working to address these issues and establish a consistent site security plan review process. I am concerned, however, that flaws in the law make ambiguity and consistency in the review process unavoidable. I mean, you may have taken care of this one, but it's going to pop up again.
Yeah.
That's because Section 550 grants discretion to the Secretary to approve site security plans that fail to meet the risk-based performance standards under this program. The law says only that the Secretary may disapprove a plan that fails to meet those standards. As many of this committee will perhaps recall, I recall it well, because I offered an amendment during the markup of H.R. 908 that would have changed that word may to a shall, to require that site security plans be disapproved if they fail to meet performance standards. That word may is what causes the ambiguity and the having to go back and re-question, and the time is of the essence when we're talking about Homeland Security. So Mr. Beers, back to you again. Do you agree that site security plans failing to meet the standards should be disapproved?
Congresswoman, our objective here is to get the yes.
I know.
So the notion of disapproval doesn't necessarily accomplish that. The point is, when we say we're not prepared to approve it, that's the functional equivalent thereof. But what we want to do is have a cooperative relationship
Right.
with industry in order to say whether or not a plan requires more information or more clarification.
And industry needs to have this as well. May I just finish one sentence?
And we're trying to get these in before the votes on the floor.
Well, I believe that it should be a requirement so that industry is clear about what they need to do.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair will now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Cassidy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The memo is one, let me just commend you for asking it be drawn up. On the other hand, obviously it paints a disaster in terms of acquisition, inventory management, attitudes. I mean, it's just a total indictment. Now, as a guy that represents an area with lots of petrochemical, lots of businesses and workers dependent upon this, if I concede the argument that you're important, your job is important for safety, it frankly seems not just an indictment of your organization, but it frankly seems to place my constituents at risk. Now, that said, how many employees does this particular division of DHS have?
I want to say 206.
206?
I believe so.
Now, this problem seems so endemic. How many have been fired? I mean, it seems like an easy target because they speak of consistently people being hired because they know somebody. People who are, I mean, you list, you can almost write somebody's name in here if you only have 206 people. So clearly it wasn't, how many have been fired? How many are going to be fired?
Sir, with respect to the issue about the re-tiering,
No, I'm just, I mean, just a simple question. I mean, clearly there's an endemic problem here, and it's rife. How many have been fired? It's a pretty simple question if you only have 206 employees. And how many do you have on the chopping block?
sir, with respect to the leadership of the organization, the people who were in the leadership positions in the organization.
I only have 3 minutes. Can I have a number?
Have moved on.
How many?
That's 2 people specifically.
Okay, so 2 out of 206, 1%, and yet we have people here hired apparently because they know somebody, promoted because they know somebody, apparently fudging on their gas reports. We only have only 1%. It seemed like the organization, and I don't mean this to be kind of snitty, but I'm just amazed that we're tolerating this level of incompetence. Now, I'm struck in your document here, you say that, I'm quoting from page 9, we've yet to approve a site security compliance inspection. Moreover, we have not yet determined what it will look like. And yet, since this report was reported in the news, we've quadrupled the number of compliance reports issued. Now, is that my understanding, or I understand incorrectly?
It's what we've quadrupled is the number of site security plans we've conditionally authorized, which is the step that precedes the conduct of an authorization inspection, which then leads to the final approval of a facility's site security plan, sir.
Okay, so the indictment of the report stands that we've 6 years into this, and we've yet to come up with a compliance inspection program. I don't know what to say. Now, I do know what to say. Clearly, there are ways to contract this out. I don't know how you don't just start over with this program. But I understand that the Coast Guard has the authority to use an alternative security program. Can we use an alternative security program? I understand, again, you have this authorization already. Can we use that now, since it looks like the current program is so dysfunctional to be beyond restitution?
Sir, the short answer is yes, and I'm going to let David describe what we've done with respect to that.
We do already have some alternative security programs that have been submitted by industry stakeholders, and we're working very aggressively in partnership with our industry stakeholders to develop some templates that can be used. We can't prescribe a specific template, but we're going to work through some templates that will, the hope is, allow for more expeditious, speedy review and approval of
But this does not
security
include
programs.
contracting out this function, correct? Can you go to a third party to conduct these inspections? I mean, what you describe here is a staff which is poorly hired, poorly trained, and has a poor attitude, and has a sense of law enforcement wanting to be called commander and wear pistols, as opposed to actually go through and look at something in terms of
Sir,
compliance.
compliance inspection is an inherently government function. We have to have the people who do that be federal employees.
Now, it's my understanding, though, that the Coast Guard actually has an alternative standard, and frankly, Bummer now has it, whatever they call the offshore for the oil rigs. They have a third party that's inspecting oil rigs.
I can't speak to the Coast Guard, sir. I'm not aware.
Okay. I have much more to ask.
If the gentleman yields 5, they also
Yes,
have some contractors doing TSA functions at some of the airports. It's worth looking into. I'd like to yield now 5 minutes to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. None of us can be happy about this memo that came out last November showing how poorly this program is serving the American public. And this is a serious matter. This is a matter of national security from possible attacks by terrorists on chemical plants. I know that all of us are concerned, not just the people here in the Congress, but Mr. Beers and others in the administration. We have a stark and troubling picture, but perhaps there's a silver lining, because it appears to be that the department is taking the situation clearly. But I want to talk about Congress's role. It's easy at a hearing like this, after we get a report of a failure, to beat up on the people running the program. But Congress has a responsibility as well. This program was established in an appropriations bill, not a bill that came out of this committee. It was a writer on an appropriations bill. Mr. Beers, is there a provision in Section 550 that addresses personnel hiring?
I'm not aware of it, sir.
Is there a provision that addresses the use of travel cards or purchase cards?
No, sir, I'm not aware of that.
How about a provision that details how inspections are to be conducted?
No, sir.
Is there a provision that explains how background checks should be conducted?
No, sir.
Are there any enforceable deadlines in this law that was written in the appropriations bill?
No, sir.
The answers to these questions are all no, and the reason is that this committee never held a hearing or conducted a markup on legislation to create this program. So the problems we see today were never contemplated by this committee, and no direction was provided. Now, I understand Mr. Barton said you ought to resign. But Mr. Barton was the chair of the committee at the time this law was adopted through an appropriations bill. We tried to get the people who have a stake in this to work out legislation when the Democrats were in power and I was chairman. And we had the chemical industry and others with us. When the Republicans came to power, they, on this committee, said, let's just extend this for 7 years. We'll just kick this thing down the road for 7 years. Now, one of the proponents of doing that was the chemical industry. They were troubled by some of the ideas that we'd have further inspections and we'd have further deadlines and we'd make sure that things happen. But while they participated with us in trying to change the law, they said all they wanted to do this last year was extend the existing law for 7 years. Now, this existing law doesn't have much of a requirement on you. You've established a working group, Mr. Beers, in the department to look at legislative and regulatory changes and whether they're necessary. Is that correct?
As a whole within the department.
Speak into the mic and be sure it's on.
Sorry. Yes, sir, with respect to the entirety of the department.
And the November report identified several statutory limitations on the program that limits effectiveness and includes rigid and limited enforcement authority. For example, a facility could violate requirements 20 times, and you wouldn't have the authority to take any more action based on repeat violations. That means that they can repeat these violations over and over again, and you couldn't do anything about it. Is that right?
Sir, that's an element of the report that we've looked into as a result of the report. While it is true that just on the face of it, the answer to that is yes, we believe we could use our administrative order authority to have some action against a company.
You're going to have to use your regulatory authority to do something that should have been set in the law by Congress. I hope this working group will examine that. The report calls into question the adequacy of the program's performance standards. That memo said, without testing to evaluate the effectiveness of the performance standards, adequacy of the standard often is more a matter of opinion or fact. Will your working group give us some recommendations on that issue?
Sir, as we come to recommendations, yes, we'll give those to you. We, as you know, have to go through a very formal
you're
process.
Going to examine that issue, I presume.
We will?
Well, Congress should have examined it as well. So my point to you is, well, we're pointing fingers at you, and you're saying you have excuses, and everybody says we're going to do better. I think we all have a burden to bear in the failure. And Congress didn't do its job, and we hoped you would have taken up the slack and done the job that Congress should have directed you to do. But I think it's awfully premature for members of this committee to try to put the whole blame on you and say you ought to quit. Maybe some members of Congress ought to quit if we're not doing our job or be replaced. Yield back my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognize the gentleman from Colorado for 5 minutes, and we're going to try to get this done and then adjourn the hearing after he's through. So they did just call votes.
I thank the chairman for the recognition, and thank you as well to the witnesses for being here today. When I first read this memo, it was a little bit like Jerry Maguire meets the Titanic. You've got, this is just some of the words and phrases used in this memo: unnecessary expenses, unqualified personnel, unsuited for the work, problems with how money's spent, foul language, ineffective hiring, unauthorized expenses, inappropriate work behavior, catastrophic failure, perceived cronyism, favoritism. How would you grade your performance on a scale of 1 to 100?
I think this report is a clear indication that the program needs a whole lot of work on it, but I don't think it entirely recognizes what we've done, and I'm not being an apologist, but I do think that it indicates that we have some major challenges which we are prepared to address.
I mean, unauthorized use of money, problems with how money is spent. Is there criminal activity taking place here?
Sir, those are issues that we are looking into when we discovered them.
So you are looking into possible criminal activities?
If that turns out to be the result of these reviews, the answer to that, of course, is yes. We have an obligation to you and to the American public to do that.
Do you, I mean, in terms of what you're facing, what else are we missing from this memo? I mean, is this a comprehensive memo? Are there other issues that you're finding, other issues that need to be addressed?
Sir, you're asking me to say what the unknowns are here. I'm not saying that this memo is the entirety. I don't think David would say that. But it does represent a commitment to make sure that we understand the problems as we know them and to come up with solutions to fix that. David?
I would just add that I would echo the Undersecretary's sentiments. I would say that the report was focused, as it was intended to be an internal, candid assessment. It was focused very much on the challenges side of the equation. It did not focus as much on the program's successes and opportunities. I would add too that we have a very talented and committed workforce within ISED. We have very committed folks on at both the headquarters and in the field, all eager to move the program forward. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the problems we identified in the report are certainly not insignificant, but they're by no means insurmountable. And we're looking forward. We have a nearly 100-point action plan that is in progress. We're meeting on a weekly basis with Deputy Undersecretary Spalding to review progress on those items, and we anticipate continued progress.
The report identifies several issues with unionization, the challenges you faced with the union. Can you name any other agencies or offices who deal in anti-terrorism, security, national security, who placed a union in the picture before most accountability measures were put in place?
I'm not aware of any. But
okay, let's talk a little bit about the budget. The memo talks on page 15, and I say, quote, ISCD lacks a system for tracking the usage of consumable supplies, which creates an environment for fraud, waste, and abuse. This isn't an Inspector General report. It's not the GAO saying this. It's the program managers describing their own program. So how can a member of Congress choose to fund a program that is so self-described?
We recognize some administrative shortcomings in the tracking of funds, and recognizing too that this is a relatively new program, relatively new organization. We have put into place safeguards relating to the receipt of goods. As I mentioned earlier, we didn't identify actual fraud, waste, or abuse, just that there were additional processes that needed to be put into place to ensure that that does not happen.
And sir, just a point of clarification here, that part of the report is actually taken from another review that was accomplished started before and finished during the period in which they prepared that, and it was our own compliance unit that did that, that discovered that. They didn't discover any charges to be laid, but they said that the procedures were inadequate, as the report correctly says.
Is there DHS has an Inspector General, correct?
We have an Inspector General, and we have also, for the whole department, and we have an Office of Compliance and Security within our own NPPD, and that's who looked into this issue at the Assistant Secretary in my request.
So the Inspector General has looked into this?
The Inspector General has access to these reports, yes, sir, but this was not done by them.
Have you had conversations with the Inspector General?
With respect to this report?
Yes.
I can't speak to that. I have not personally had that conversation.
But he has this memorandum?
As with all of these kinds of reports, yes, they're available.
They're available, or he has them? I mean, have you sent it to them?
I will have to confirm that to you, sir.
Thank you. And another question I would have, just based on the authorization, would a multi-year authorization give you the surety that you need to pursue programmatic improvements? Would it be helpful for you to be assured that legislatively the program can't change?
As the report says, and as we have said for some time, a long-term authorization of this program is vital both to the workforce and to our security partners and stakeholders in this program. It gives us a longer-term stability that a year-to-year, unfortunately, doesn't provide us.
On the issue of retiering, there are a number of sites that were retired last fall.
I would remind my colleague that we're getting close to the votes being already called.
I have some additional questions. I'll get over to you. Yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time, and I appreciate that. Let me just say and follow up. I think Mr. Beers testified he would like the law to have been made permanent at the last, in the March hearing. So, let me also just again thank you, Mr. Beers, for your long career of public service. And this is a part of your portfolio, not your entire portfolio. A Marine Corps officer in Vietnam, Foreign Service, obviously did stuff at the Department of State, the Middle East, Persian Gulf, internal narcotics and law enforcement. We get caught up in the heat of battle. We expect you to address these issues and fix them, and that'll make further hearings go well. And just in response to my friend Mr. Waxman, I love this founding father quote, "Where good laws do well, good men do better." So you can't pass a law for total compliance. It's really the people that make things work, and I think you're going to get a handle on it. I just wish that the people who have left the department did not get a move, but probably would have been held more accountable to their activities. With that, I'd like to adjourn this hearing. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.